So from our perspective, from Indian perspective, there was no Alexander. But Seleucus Nicator came a decade or two later, was important. But the world only remembers Alexander. So it's propaganda. India has been exporting its genetics for thousands and thousands of years, which completely contradicts what we are taught in school. That we had this taboo of crossing the ocean, dharma prashta ho jayega and so on. Piece of history embedded in the Rig Veda, which is called the Battle of the Ten Kings. Okay, Dashurajna Yuddha or something. The Battle of the Ten Kings. This is the oldest geopolitical conflict in the historical record. And it is one king, standing up against a whole coalition of kings. And that one king defeats the whole coalition of kings. And those kings who are defeated and their people are forced to go into exile. They're forced out of India into exile, out of India, northwards and westwards. Okay. And they essentially became the originators of the Indo-European culture all across Eurasia, essentially. And it's funny that the oldest written evidence of Sanskrit is not found in India. Okay. It is found in Syria. Now, how did that happen is the question, right? So I'm curious. Yeah, it's found in Syria. So there used to be this empire in Syria called the Mitanni Empire, which existed around 1500 BC. Okay, 1500 BC. So the people in the region, they spoke a language called the Hurrian language, not Sanskrit. So they've discovered a whole stone tablet with a horse training manual in it, which has a horse training manual. And you can still use it to train war horses today. That's how good the manual is. Now, the writer of the manual, he calls himself Kikuli. Okay. That's his name, Kikuli. And he writes the whole manual in the Hurrian language. But there are some complicated technical terms that don't exist in the Hurrian language. So that's why he is forced to use his own native language for that, which is Sanskrit. Okay? So there are Sanskrit words and Sanskrit terms embedded in the Hurrian text. Navavartana, 9 rounds of the thing, and that sort of thing. And then you find, so that's one evidence. And then they discovered a peace treaty between the Hittites and the Mitanni. Okay. The Hittite Empire and the Mitanni Empire. The Hittite Empire was also kind of similar to the Mitanni. So the peace treaty is written down on a tablet, stone tablet, and then gods are invoked as witnesses to the treaty. Mitra, Varuna, Indra, etc.
That's very much culturally rooted in the... Yeah, absolutely.
So that peace treaty dates back around 1500 years. So we find, what the historians have discovered is that the Mitanni Empire, the aristocracy, the royalty was Aryan, Indo-Aryan. And the rest of the people were the locals. So it means that the Indians had gone and conquered the place and they were ruling it. Right. Okay? And it's also interesting that, we have this animal called the zebu cattle. Okay. Indian, cattle with a long dewlap, that sort of thing, and a big hump. That's a standard cattle that you find in the Indus Valley Science, the seals, right? That's an Indian cattle. It originates in the subcontinent. Now you find that this animal suddenly appears in Egypt about 2000 BC. It also appears in West Asia around 2000 BC, right? And the Mitanni Empire happens around 1500 BC. So you clearly see, look, cattle don't go for a walk. They don't say, okay, let's go for a walk, let's migrate. Yes. They go with humans. Yeah. They're domestic animals. Correct. So it indicates Indians went to West Asia around 2000 BC and even into Egypt. And it's also interesting that around the same time, about 5,000 years before today, you suddenly find in Australia the introgression of Indian genetics. Okay. Today, about 10% of in Australia you have white people today. They are the majority population. But the original inhabitants of Australia are called the Australian Aboriginal people whose land has been stolen by the whites. Okay. So if you look at the genetics of the Aboriginal Australian population, about 10% of it is from the subcontinent. Okay. It's Indian. And that entered Australia about roughly 5,000 years before today. 5,000 years before today. And you also find in Australia there's this wild dog called the dingo. Okay. That also appears about 4,500 years ago. And if you look at the dog, it looks like our standard issue street dog in India. So the Indian genetics and Indian dog and some other technologies also came into Australia about 4,500 years ago. So once again, it tells you how far and wide our people spread. So in the West, we have the Mitanni Empire, the Hittite Empire, and the spread of various Indo-European languages, and we also went all the way to Australia. Now, there is this myth that is taught to us in school, that Indians had this taboo of crossing the sea. You can't cross the sea, dharma brashta ho jayega, and so on. So how did we reach Australia?
That's right.
Did we go by plane 5,000 years ago? I mean, the only way you do it is by crossing the sea.
Correct.
So it kind of busts all these myths. And then you have the fact that Indians have been living in East Africa for centuries, maybe thousands of years. I mean, if you go to Kenya, Tanzania, etc., you will find Indian communities all over the place, even today over there. So Indians have been trading with Africa for God knows how long. And if you look at the cuisine of Africa, East Africa, it's very strongly influenced by Indian cuisine.
Correct.
If you look at the dress, the kind of dresses they wear, they're very strongly influenced by Indian dresses, especially what the ladies wear. They look like saris. If you look at Somalia, Ethiopia, the dresses they wear look like saris very much. So it tells you that India has been exporting its genetics for thousands and thousands of years, which completely contradicts what we are taught in school, that we had this taboo of crossing the ocean, dharma brashta ho jayega, and so on. Right? So this is something our people need to know. We are not taught these things. We are taught all these regressive, nonsensical theories that are super outdated, completely obsolete, and so on.
Yeah.
Then there's the question of invasions.
Yeah.
We are told that we were invaded over and over again.
Correct.
Right? Well, we actually, sure, we were invaded. So let's take a look at some invasions. Let's take a look at the invasions. So first of all, we have the Greek invasion. Okay, the Greek. So about 2,500 years ago, there was the Nanda Empire. And when the Nanda Empire was in power, it was in power in Patliputra, right? That was the capital city. It was based out of Magad, which is today Bihar.
Yeah.
So at that time, Alexander the Greek, not Greek, Alexander the Greek attempted an invasion of India.
Yeah.
And he fought some low-level king called Purushottam on the outskirts of India and around the India-Persia border, and he was defeated by him. What we are taught is that he defeated Purushottam and then he decided to go back to India, to wherever, Babylon essentially. But if you look at so what's the evidence that he defeated Purushottam? None. Okay, and at that time we had the great university of Takshashila in the region, right? So if there was a great battle and a great invasion by Alexander, then why didn't the historians in Takshashila record anything?
Absolutely.
There is no Indian record of Alexander. No, none whatsoever. There is no Indian record of Alexander. But there are records of his general Seleucus Nicator who came later. So from our perspective, from Indian perspective, there was no Alexander. But Seleucus Nicator, who came a decade or two later, was important. But the world only remembers Alexander. So it's propaganda.
It's propaganda.
It's propaganda.
Correct.
I mean, the Russian field marshal, Zhukov, one of the greatest warriors of the 20th century, who won the Second World War for Russia essentially, he was a historian of warfare as well. And he has put it on the record that according to him, Alexander was actually defeated by Purushottam, by Porus. And the wounds he sustained in the battle, they eventually led to his death. Right? So Alexander attempts an invasion, doesn't work, it fails, he goes back and he dies. Then his general, Seleucus Nicator, attempts to create an empire for himself. And by the time, so he comes back to India about a decade later, a decade after Alexander's attempted invasion. And he finds that there's a new empire in India. The Nanda Empire has disappeared. Now there's a Mauryan empire. Chandragupta is the emperor and his mentor is Vishnugupta Chanakya. So there is a brief war between Greeks and India in the Gandhara region. At the time, Afghanistan was part of India. So the Greeks had grabbed Gandhar and so on. There's a brief war. And then the two sides come to an agreement. That why fight? So apparently there was a matrimonial alliance. Chandragupta accepted Seleucus' daughter as his wife. So they become relatives. And then you can't fight if you're relatives, right? And so there was a peace treaty about 2,400 years ago in which Greece gave back Gandhar and all of that to India. And India gave Seleucus Nicator 500 war elephants. And with that, he conquered a huge empire called the Seleucid Empire.
Interesting.
So there was an Indo-Greek alliance about 2.4 or 2.5 thousand years before today. But after so for a couple of generations, India and Greece remained allies. Chandragupta's son also had good relations with the son of Seleucus Nicator. They had diplomatic correspondence and all, which is there in the public record. And then you had a Greek ambassador to India, to Patliputra, which is Patna today. His name was Megasthenes. So he wrote a record of the India that he found. It's called Indica.
Okay.
And it's destroyed today, it's not to be found, but it is mentioned in other Greek texts. That's why we know what was mentioned in the Indica. So it says that in India, society was very peculiar. There were 7 classes of people in India. We think of a caste system with four castes, right? During the Mauryan times, there were 7 classes of people.
Okay.
I don't remember what the classes were, but warriors and tradespeople and so on and so forth. 7 classes of people in India. And Megasthenes says that the Indians have a very old calendar which they use. It's called the Saptarshi calendar. And it dates back to about 6,300 something BC.
Okay.
6,000 something BC. Okay, so we were recording events from about 8,000 years before today.
Right.
And we had a calendar called the Saptarshi calendar, which was about 6,000 something years old at the time Megasthenes was in India. Okay, that's what it records. So imagine how ancient our civilization is, right? That's another indicator of that. So we have this period where we have an Indo-Greek alliance. Then the Seleucid Empire disintegrated.
Okay.
And the various governors that they had placed in various parts of the region, they became kings in their own right.
Okay.
And then the Mauryan Empire also declined. So these governors were able to encroach into parts of Gandhar, parts of Western Punjab and also so on. And this became the Indo-Greek period, where you had Indo-Greek kings who became Indianized culturally. They married Indian ladies and all, but they were still Greeks, Yavanas. So one of them was Menander, who was a scholar of the Vedas, who eventually became a Buddhist, and he was also a great warrior. He almost came to Varanasi apparently.
Okay.
And so on. So we have the Greeks who became us. And eventually the Indo-Greek kingdoms simply melted into the Indian population. They never went back to Athens or anything. They simply melted into the Indian population. So if you actually do it, a genetic survey of the people of northern and western India, you will find a little bit of Greek ancestry in them. Maybe 0.5% or something.
Okay.
It will be there even today because these people simply assimilated into Indian society. Then there was a Scythian invasion.
Okay.
The Scythians, the Shaka people, they were a nomadic people who lived across Central Asia.
Okay.
They were sun worshippers. They had various kings and they had queens also. So they invaded the Indo-Greek region, northwestern India, about 150 BC, roughly, give or take. Okay. And they then eventually were able to succeed gradually, and they established big kingdoms in northern and western India. Northern India, you had the northern satraps. In western India, you had the western Mahakshatrapas. And the western Mahakshatrapas, the Scythians, they were Shaivites. They were the guardians and protectors of the great Somnath temple, and they controlled the great ports of Gujarat, via which we were trading with Rome and getting a tremendous amount of gold from Rome. So the Mahakshatrapas, they were tremendous rulers, fantastic rulers. They originally were Scythians, but they became us. So whoever came, they became us.
Yeah.
After the Scythians, another tribe came to India, the Kushans. So the Kushans, they originated in the Tarim River Basin region, which is north of Ladakh. Okay. And they were fleeing the Huns, who came from the Mongolia region. So the Huns suddenly became a big threat to everybody, to the Chinese and to everybody else. So the Huns, because of their empire spreading, the Kushans were pushed westwards. And west of the Kushans, you have the Scythians. So fleeing the Kushans, the Scythians came into India.
Interesting.
And a couple of centuries later, fleeing the Huns, the Kushans themselves came into India. And then you had a Kushan empire that became a very prominent empire. And one of our greatest emperors of all time was Kanishka, who was a Kushan. And he did more than anybody I can think of except for Ashok to spread our culture and civilization far and wide. So Ashok was a pretty nasty guy, but he was a tremendously good ruler and he unified the subcontinent. And Ashok spread Dhamma westwards to Greece and Egypt and so on. Kanishka said, I will spread it eastwards. So he sent, with every trade delegation to China, he sent religious scholars, Vedic scholars, Buddhist scholars, go and teach and civilize them. And Kanishka had conquered such a huge empire, which its boundaries were from the Caspian Sea to the Aral Sea, and the whole of present-day so-called Xinjiang region.
Okay.
And of course, he had two capitals in India. One was Purushpur, which is Peshawar.
Okay.
The other one was, I think, Mathura, if I'm not mistaken. So a huge empire here. One of our greatest emperors of all time, but apparently he was a migrant, a Kushan. But if you look at the ethnicity of the Scythians and the Kushans, they most likely were descendants of the people who were defeated in the 10 Kings battle. Okay? Because the Scythians were sun worshippers. And when they re-entered India, there was no cultural disharmony or anything. They simply naturally assimilated into the Indian population, which means they were essentially just like us.
Yeah.
And even the Kushans. The Kushans, well, you find mummies in the Tarim region basin river today because it's a very dry place. And you find that the people who lived there, they were about 6 feet tall, maybe taller. They had red hair, probably blue eyes. They spoke a language called Tocharian, which is the Tushara language. So they look like Europeans. But if you look at the language, it is kaka, gaga, gaga, all that. Okay? And if you look at the gods they worship, they were Indian gods. So, for interesting facts and stories about Indian culture and civilization and history, please follow the Sanatani channel.